Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to According to the Book. And today we're going to be talking to Jose Hernandez. Hi, Jose. We met in our master's program. And in fact, you just defended yours like not even a month ago, right? Your thesis?
It was, yeah, probably exactly a month ago, if I recall correctly. It was around the 12th of July. So yeah, it's been a bit more than a month, but yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Angel. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, no, and thank you for being able to have the time. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, of course, like I've been mentioning on most of these, is there's a lot of stuff in the book that the students see, but they can't really contextualize it or they haven't been really through it themselves. So it's a good way to ground the subject matter for them. And why don't we go ahead and start with where are you from originally?
Well, I was born in Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas. For the record, I am 33 years old, so it's been a while since I haven't been back home. Right now, I'm currently living in Ciudad de Mexico. Yes.
Oh, wow. You are very far from home, sir.
Yeah.
And then, so how did you end up learning English?
So it's a really interesting story. I started learning English when I was 9, and I learned English by studying at an elementary school over at Georgia in the U.S. Specifically, I honestly I do not recall the name, but I do recall that it was in Athens, and it was with a specialized teacher. Like it was one teacher that was teaching me English at the end of like regular classes. So I had to like attend regular classes and then go to those lessons and then go back home. So yeah, that was pretty much my experience.
Oh, wow.
Um,
So you started quote unquote kind of late, right? I mean, most people learn it either when they're much younger and then like starting in school, but you didn't learn it until you were actually in the US, correct?
yeah, I mean, we did have like standard like English lessons over here at Mexico, but like actually learning the language was over there.
Okay.
It was a mixture of like taking those lessons and having a great teacher to work with, and also like experiencing the language, like having that sort of difficulty of I need to speak with with kids, but I don't know how, right? I don't know what
Right.
to do or what to say. So it was a significant need for me, and I think it was like the perfect storm in that regard, in
Mhm.
that I had like a good teacher and like a significant necessity to learn the language. So yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so you left again pretty old. I mean, around nine, most people have already memories about around that age. How was the culture shock going from Ciudad Victoria to like Athens, Georgia?
At the in the beginning, it was kind of rough. And I suppose that throughout the whole period, it was rough because in the end, um, I didn't stay. Right, I only stayed for 1 year over there,
Okay.
and I don't miss it. So, yeah. So probably my like my childhood experience, what I remember about it wasn't very good. I didn't have a lot of friends, even though I did manage to like speak with some kids. Um, but overall, it felt kind of lonely.
Okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't so much the culture shock that sort of prevented me from enjoying the experience, but more like the loneliness of being over there and not having, for example, friends that I missed from over here in Mexico, or things that I missed from over here in Mexico, for example, like the food, um, or even like the weather. So stuff like that was pretty significant for me.
Well, so you said you were only in Georgia for a year, or you were only in the States for a year?
Well, I had gone earlier when I was like 4 years old. I stayed over there a bit, um, but really really staying over there, it was just that year in Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you said it's been a while since you've been home. So after Georgia, where did you go?
Oh, I mean, after Georgia, I did return to Victoria, but it was like these years that I've been away. Like I've been in Monterrey, I've been over here in Ciudad de Mexico. I would say like it's been around a year and a half, and it sounds like a small amount of time, but for me, I'm kind of homesick. I'm just waiting for December to come because I have like vacations in my job, so I can like go back to the desert and relax for a moment. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're homesick, a year seems like forever, right?
Hmm.
So, when you came back, so like you were only there a year. So, did you experience any kind of reverse culture shock coming back?
A bit, but I mean, I would say that the only thing that I found kind of weird when I came back was that I didn't miss a lot about the states. Like,
Okay.
yeah. So when I came back, I felt pretty comfortable for a moment.
Hmm.
But then I started like having, I wouldn't say issues, but I started feeling uncomfortable in school
Okay.
in the sense that um, sometimes since I'm usually very introvert when I'm not around friends or at home, um, people didn't really think that I knew what I knew in English lessons. There was a point sometime later in middle school where a teacher downright like accused me of cheating because I didn't do anything in her lessons. I didn't do anything in her classes, but when it came to exams, I aced them. So she thought that like I was cheating or looking at the book or anything, but
Hmm.
no, I think it was the only time where I like spoke up to a teacher in English at that time,
Hmm.
and so that she could like see that and hear that I do know the language. I just didn't care because I was a stupid teenager. So yeah, so that's pretty much what happened. Yes.
That's definitely because now you said you didn't miss a whole lot of stuff. This is something that people ask me all the time. Is like,
Mhm.
do you miss the states? And it's like, well, no, not really. I always tell them the same thing. It's like I miss the roads,
Mhm.
right? Like the nice wide lanes. I miss the clear road signs, right? That kind of thing.
Mhm.
Obviously, the friends that I made there, but I went a little older and
Mhm.
stayed way longer than a year.
Mhm.
So, in that year, was there anything that you did end up missing from the United States?
Mm, I mean, it was pretty interesting because I think the teacher noticed that I wasn't like really getting along with anyone at
Mhm.
school. So she ended up like contacting my parents and asking if we could if I could hang out with her kid.
Mhm.
And I do recall that those are like pretty like happy times because like I got to visit another kid, and I got to experience some sort of cultural situations over there that I wouldn't have experienced over here. For example, with her family, I experienced like the Easter egg hunt,
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah, and that was something that I had never like experienced in my life, and up to this point I haven't thus far.
Right.
So it was a pretty interesting time there. So yeah, probably the only true friends that I made were like her, like that the teacher and her family. So yeah.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, like yeah, Easter egg hunts. They're not really a thing here
No.
in Mexico, right?
Hmm.
So understandable. Um, and now you said you recently, in a in a very relaxed term, moved to Mexico City. Why did you end up in Mexico City?
Well, it actually goes back to what you mentioned at the beginning, the master's program.
Okay.
Yeah, during the master's program, I met two people.
Mhm.
It was two friends, Gil and Ismael, and they work at a place called the Anglo Foundation.
Okay.
So for some reason, they enjoyed or found interesting my thesis presentation and like all the contributions in my that contributions in my opinion that I made to like the master's program and like discussing things. And with some discussion with them after working at the master's program, they said, "Well, if there's a chance, we'll call you and we'll see if we can give you like a job over here because
Right.
it looks like you can contribute to the foundation." And it happened, but it wasn't like straight away that I moved over to Mexico City. It was first I got an offer for distance lessons.
Okay.
Yeah, so I got the contract and I started working from Ciudad Victoria in the foundation. And then at around May of 2023, I got the call that there was a position that was like open, that the person suddenly left. And they told me, "Hey, you want to work over here?" And I said yes. So I applied for the position, and here I am. It's been a year.
Excellent. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned while we were in the master's program, you said, Ciudad Victoria, I think it's fair to describe it as a small town,
Hmm.
and that you would just walk everywhere. You love to walk and you would just walk everywhere. How does that compare to moving to one of the largest and densely populated cities in the world?
It was now we can talk about culture shock, and
Okay.
it's really interesting because it's like culture shock within the same country, right?
Right.
But Mexico is such a vast country that the differences between the north and the center and the south are really drastic.
Very so.
Um, and in my case, there's been like two things that I had to adjust. First, as you mentioned, like the distances, traveling is more difficult for me over here. I enjoy walking, but it would be impossible for me to make it to work if I walked, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I have to take a commute. So I use the trolebus and I use Metrobus
Okay.
within Mexico City. I sometimes use the subway, but only if I have to go to another like site, because the foundation has three different like school sites.
Okay.
One is down south at Florida in Insurgentes Sur.
Okay.
Another one is at Antonio Caso, which is near what's it called? Oh, Monumento a la Revolución. Yeah, so
Okay.
it's kind of close there, close to that place. It's near Reforma, and another one is on Ciudad Satélite, which is
Oh wow.
northwest. Yeah, so it's pretty far. So whenever I have to like explain a bit about my job. My job involves observing classes. So I observe classes and I grade and provide feedback to the teachers observed. Sometimes these classes can be at a distance. Sometimes these classes can have to be on site in person. So my main office is at Florida, so that takes me about an hour for commuting. When I have to go to any other site, I have to either carpool with one of my coworkers,
Mhm.
or I have to take the subway in the case of Antonio Caso. So in this case, like all of this has been pretty. It was jarring at the beginning because there's so many people over here, so many people, and when it comes even just like the trolebus, it gets crowded so quickly, and it gets bottled up, and people like they just don't care. It's kind of it was kind of jarring for me at the beginning, but I've managed so far. By this point, I'm pretty used to it, and it's kind of interesting that I have throughout this year that I've stayed here, like a year in a bit. I've only encountered like two or three like strange things that happen in public transport.
Okay.
Two of them were like fights that people were like literally like getting into fisticuffs
Okay.
over stuff, and the other one was a person. I don't know if the person was like drugged or something,
Mhm.
but they were like acting really strange and like smashing their head on the door, and like
Yeah.
no, yeah, that was pretty weird. But so far that's been like the only thing that I've had to like deal with regarding like just the transport system. The other thing that I've had to deal with is the weather. I mean, coming from a desert,
Right.
it's pretty interesting to see that over here it rains almost every part of the year. I mean, it rains in spring, it rains in summer, it rains in autumn, it rains in winter.
And it rains every day, sometimes all
Yeah,
day. Yeah.
exactly. So it's been interesting for me, and I've had to get used to that as well, because I'm a bit of a sickly person. So if I ever get like drenched in water, rainwater, I'm
Mhm.
out. I'm probably going to get sick for like a week. So I need to be really careful about that. Um, and well, we've sort of gotten along with the food. It's always like a difficult part, like getting, getting used to the food in different
Right.
places. But yeah, those have been like the main cultural differences that I've encountered from moving to from a place up north to the center to the capital of Mexico.
So have you had issues with like quesadillas sin queso and tortas de tamal?
Ooh, that's the last one is a really interesting part because it's sort of like a silly superstition of mine that if I ever eat torta de tamal, my transformation would be complete.
Right.
From so so I'm not interested in that. I still cling to my identity as a northern person.
When I told my brother that I finally walked my dogs without a leash, like I had the leash with me in case we encountered other dogs at the park.
Mhm.
But normally it's like I hook them up as soon as we leave the house. The whole walk they're on the leash, and then and I told him I was like I let them go at the park today, and he would just went the Mexicanization is complete. I was like finally coming back because like yeah, little things that you mentioned, the culture shock even within the same country, like when I went to the States, people would tell me like, "Don't you know the meaning of personal space?" And it's like, no. When you get on the trolebus or the metro or the subway, and like they just pack you in like sardines, like there's no such thing, right? You go to a market and you sit down to eat, and you're sitting, along perfect strangers and things like that. So when I came back and people would see me on the park, just our neighbors, and be like, "Hey, good morning," I'd be like, "Why are you talking to me?" Like, who are you? Little things like that. So like yeah, I can totally see that like with the torta. Like it might happen. It might happen. I remember when I went to the States, I fought the temptation or as long as I could of not going to Taco Bell. I thought to myself, as a self respecting Mexican, I cannot go to Taco Bell. But then it's 3 in the morning, everything else is closed, and you just left the bar. It's like, ah, it was, oh well, ni modo, right? So one day maybe. Right?
Yeah.
And when that happens, you let me know. 'Cause it might be a religious experience. It might be the letdown of your life. So who knows,
Probably, yeah.
right? Excellent, Jose. So you've been working at the Anglo. You've been everywhere. What is next for you? Like we were talking when you were here for your thesis defense, that schooling is not over. Like now you're considering a Delta program, correct?
Yes, that is correct. I'm still studying for that. I'm probably gonna take the Delta exam on December. Yeah. So it's like 3 months before that. Um, yeah. I mean, for reference, for the audience,
Yeah.
yeah, Delta is sort of a postgraduate program for teachers, and it has 3 modules: one related to theory, one to practice, and one to curriculum design or syllabus design. So I'm thinking about taking the first module, which is related to theory, on December, and I would probably be practicing what like most of 2025 for the second module because it has to do with teaching practice, and there's like a lot of things that you have to do in that one. like you need to really bring your A game, not even your A game, your S game to it. So it's really really tough. And of all, and like in general of my, like, let's say, proficiencies as a teacher, I would say
Mhm.
that I still need to polish certain parts of my teaching, right? So yeah, I'm not nervous, but I'm cautious about it. I want to really prepare myself to get the pass on these exams.
Right. No, it's one of the things that I tell my students when there's a section in the book where it says, like, what do you think it might be like, doing volunteer work, working from home, blah, blah, blah. And one of the options is being a teacher.
Hmm.
And sometimes they say, like, it seems stressful, it seems boring, right? And I ask them, like, why do you think that? They're like, well, because it's the same thing year in and year out. And what I tell them is, like, it might look like the same thing, but we're constantly looking for ways to improve our delivery, our explanation, how to integrate technology, like Google Meet for, like you said, online classes, right, or online observations and things like that. Um, Google Classroom and like a whole bunch of other platforms and technologies. And so like it's a nonstop, always seeking to get better, right? That they don't, like, it's all behind the scenes, really. Like all they see is a teacher in front of the classroom, and they probably just like, oh my god, it's the same book or whatever, right? So I think it's really important that you bring that up, and it's like you want to polish that aspect. And it's like I think any good teacher is always thinking that, you know. So I think it's a good sign. I guarantee you'll be fine. It's like you're so modest. I love it. Where you're like, for some reason they really liked what I had to say during the master's program. Like, dude, even the director of the program was like super excited about your presentation and everything. So um, you definitely have a lot to offer in academics and to our students. So best of luck with that Delta program.
Thank you, and I definitely agree with this idea that we are always improving, but it's always under the hood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You're never. It's. Let's say that in that way we're a bit like magicians, and that we don't give away the tricks. We only show like the prestige of of the
Right.
trick, right? Like you only show what happens, or how you make it engaging, how you make it interesting for them. But sometimes students don't really understand how or what the teacher is doing. And in my current line of duty, even the teachers themselves sometimes don't understand what they're doing, right? So it's interesting to reflect and to think that um, if you really want to like get into the profession of teaching, you need to have this mindset that you have to constantly improve. You have to constantly learn
Mhm.
something. It's not going to be eternal because there will be a point where you like learn so much that you say, well, this is the style, the teaching style that I want to have.
Correct.
um, and it's not just because I want it, but it's because I've had years of experience and I've noticed that this is what is comfortable for me, and not just comfortable for me, but effective for my learners. So that's one of the things that I've had to deal with, like as an observer, because there are teachers that have this idea that they are comfortable with their teaching, but they're comfortable with things that are not effective for the group.
Right.
So that's when you have to try to either have them reflect on it or guide them to see why, like, how effective this is. Even if it's comfortable for you, it can be better implemented for your learners. So it's something that I always keep in mind. As you mentioned, probably this kind of work has made me even more like self-critical,
Hmm.
in the sense that I can see like a lot of teachers. I think I observe around, I don't know, 150 teachers a year,
Oh
uh,
wow. Okay.
and sometimes I observe the same teacher like multiple times, and it's interesting to see how they evolve for good, for better or worse. Because I can see I've seen teachers that at the beginning of the year they didn't do so well in their like observation, but as the year progresses they do better and better.
Mhm.
But I've also seen the other way around, like teachers that didn't do so well, but get worse with each passing like term.
Right.
And it's something that I find interesting in that I would like to know like why, right? Like what makes the difference? It's still something that I'm trying to figure out, and I think that would be interesting as a research topic, like to yeah like understand these like motivations or demotivations from teachers. Sometimes I've noticed that teachers that progress and evolve are teachers that are motivated, either motivated economically or motivated internally in their own like passion and their own ambition to give good teaching.
Mhm.
And there's also teachers that are just not motivated. They don't really care about their job. They don't care about the profession. They're there because of the paycheck, and that's perfectly valid up to a point. But depending on the type of institution, it also means that you need to either step it up or you're just not going to be there anymore, right?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about the profession like that. And probably yeah, a lot of people say that I'm modest, but I think it's more like it's difficult for me to see the good in me at times. Yeah, so yeah, it's something that I also need to work on as a person, right? To believe more in myself.
I mean, I think most people have an issue with that unless like they're narcissistic or just have a lot of unearned confidence,
Mm.
right? Because that's one of the things that I find myself with as well, where it was like, am I doing a good job? Am I really doing this well? You know, every semester I doubt myself, and then at the end of the semester, the same students will say like, "Oh, I really liked your class. You're a great professor. Um, um, this you're the best teacher. Yada yada. I really like how you did this," and I was like, "Okay, all right." But then again, I immediately go back to like, well, those are just a few that told me? What about the ones that didn't tell me? What about the ones that left my class on the second day because they were like, nope, not doing this, right? So yeah, it's something that we all struggle with. It's something that we all keep in the back of our minds and are constantly working on. So it's just perfectly normal. And as long as, like you mentioned, those teachers that end up doing from okay to not that great and get worse, sometimes you get stuck in your own head and you just can't, what's the word, you can't reboot, right? And sometimes it takes someone like you to tell them like, hey, this is what's going on, this is what you need to change, and then at that point it's up to them whether they take the feedback or not, right? But I feel that's what happens with most people. It's like they just can't get out of their own heads and they just end up regressing, so to speak, right?
It's interesting because there's times, well, there's been times throughout this like year that I've experienced that there's teachers that do respond positively to that. Like, oh, I hadn't really looked at it in that way, right? It's going to make me
Mhm.
like modify my teaching in a way. But there's been a couple of times where I found teachers that get out of their heads, as you mentioned, but they see the world and they don't want to deal with it. You know, so yeah, it's really interesting because I've had a teacher tell me, yeah, no offense to people who do like Celta or Delta or Omicron or Tango Charlie. So he was really respective of it, and he just said, I don't care about professional development.
Right.
I don't care about being a better teacher. And that time really like caught me off guard as an observer and as a person, because in my mind I can't like reconcile this thought that you wouldn't want to improve professionally
Mhm.
somehow or in any way. I mean, it kind of boggled my mind to have this person teaching and having this like extremely conformist idea of his profession. But in the end, I mean, I have to give him like a score, and I have to like validate the teaching somehow. There were some things that he was doing right, but but in the end, like, it wasn't like adequate teaching or teaching that was expected out of like the standards of the foundation. So, but still, I find it really interesting that despite knowing that they can be better, there are
Mhm.
people that don't want to be better. I think that's yeah, that's
Right.
interesting.
No, but that happens like that. That's across the board. I was the example that I use with my students is athletes. What makes Ronaldo Ronaldo? What makes Messi Messi? Michael Jordan? These top tier elite athletes, who they are. And I tell them it's like it's their work ethic, and it sounds cliched, but it's like the little details. They do the little things right. You know, the most basic whatever. I mean, they have it down to like second nature, right? And I give them the example of, unfortunately, like, here in Mexico with like Giovanni Dos Santos. This is a kid that went from scoring one of the most iconic goals in a Copa Oro against the United States, right, to completely disappearing. And it's because he had no work ethic and he liked to party, and he drank a little too much beer and was always out of shape, and they just started ending up cutting him from teams and stopped calling him to the big leagues, right? Because he didn't have the work ethic. And the same thing happened with this hockey player 30 years ago, where he was selected number one. He was given this huge contract after the draft, and he just fizzled out. And he had a career. He played for over a decade. But in an interview I read about him not long ago, like 5 years ago or so, he said he's just like, I didn't really want to be a hockey player, but it was the only thing I was good at, right? So he was good enough to be pro, but he didn't really care for it. He didn't want to uh, do it, for like the rest of his life, but he didn't know how to do anything else. So I feel like there's a lot of people that end up in professions like that, be it teaching, be it uh, I don't know, taxi driver, like whatever it is, where it's like I'm just doing this to pay my rent and like that's it, and they don't really care or have any motivation to continue with that self improvement. So like one of the things that I've learned through the years is like when I do bump into a student like that or a coworker like that, it's just like, hey, to each their own, like Nimolo. But in your case, it's a little more frustrating because like you're observing them, you're grading. I mean, it's your job to tell them you need to get better,
Mhm.
or like you said, you're not going to be here much longer.
Yeah, and I mean, it's pretty common to discuss that, at least in Mexico, right?
Yeah,
Like you have people with professional degrees that are doing like menial work, or you would call it menial work, right?
right,
But in the end, as you mentioned, sometimes it's just people that have to pay their bills, right? They have to work paycheck to paycheck. There are the rare cases where people are just like comfortable in those types of jobs, or that they feel comfortable in those types of situations, because as you mentioned, it's perfectly valid to not aspire, right? Right. But as you mentioned as well, in my context, like my job is to grade you and to tell you, hey, you can do this better. And interestingly enough, it's not like the job is to, let's say, be the whip hand, right? To say
right,
like you're doing everything wrong. No, it's encouraged as an observer to highlight first what you're doing right, and then provide, well, maybe you could have done this better, you could have done this a bit better, you could have done this significantly better, but never to outright tell them, hey, you're doing this wrong, right?
right,
Because it provides a significant impact. Unless the extreme case here would be that the the teacher is like literally doing everything wrong, right? Like, or actively doing things wrong, consciously doing things wrong. In that case, yeah, you have to call them out, because
mhm,
I mean, what's up with that, right? Like, you need it. It's down to beliefs. It's something that we've discussed a lot, like in my department, that teachers sometimes have their own beliefs, as you mentioned, like
mhm,
their own philosophies about what is teaching. Sometimes to them, teaching is just a job. Sometimes to them, teaching is like their life, like they're devoted to that. And usually, beliefs that promote growth are going to show that growth eventually. Even if it's a teacher that's struggling, if that teacher wants to keep growing, they will grow because they will learn.
Right.
And in a teacher that doesn't have that belief, that they don't find it worthwhile to invest in their education, invest in their profession, they're not going to evolve, they're not going to grow. And as you mentioned as well, it's probably like a global thing in the sense that it encompasses every single vocation, every single profession, right? If you don't want to grow professionally in, let's say, medicine or like engineering, then you're probably not going to find many professional opportunities. If you don't want to grow as a programmer or in like coding or IT development,
Right.
then like you're not going to grow. And that's an example I can like discuss a bit, only because my brother works in IT, and
Right.
he also has the same drive that I have to take this course, I have to get updated with this like operating system, updated with this programming language, because if I don't, when I do get like the possibility to get a better job, if they tell me, hey, do you know how to work with, I don't know, like Python or like Java or like this new version of C++ or something like that, or a new database, or do you know how to work with AI? And if you say no to that, it's because you haven't really updated yourself,
Right.
and you're not going to be considered for the job. So yeah, it's a pretty difficult thing to consider, like what it means to grow professionally. Yes.
Well, and that's one of the things that like to put an exclamation point on this. What I tell my students when they take the TOEFL or they're about to take the TOEFL, I tell them it's just like martial arts, right? The TOEFL is your black belt, but it doesn't mean you're done. It's the beginning of the journey. I was like, how many of you have taken martial arts and you see your sensei with their black belt and like they have their little white pieces of tape on there, right? And I was like, that's, primer dan, segundo dan, however many, I'm like, because they keep learning. It's a lifelong journey, and and language is the same way. You should look at your profession the same way. It's like just because you took the TOEFL doesn't mean you're never going to see English the rest of your life. It's like it's the beginning of your journey, and it's like now it's up to you to continue learning, to continue reading, to continue engaging with the language outside of the classroom. And a lot of them like take it fairly seriously, and most go like, yeah, like, whatever. They just want to be done. They want their degree. But I mean, it's one of those of like I have to say it to every class and every student, and whoever has ears, let them hear, and who doesn't, that's on them, right? And I tell them I'm perfectly happy with you guys being my age or like in your 30s and just saying, you know what, the teacher was right. It's like when you look at it back in hindsight, I'm like, I'm okay with that. Like, you don't have to listen to me now, but it'll stay in your head forever, and one day it'll click, right?
Yeah. And like thinking about that, that part you mentioned, that you have to be constantly updated with the language. It's always really interesting to discuss it in the reading context, because culturally, in many parts of Mexico, people don't like to read.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I've always like thought about it, because personally, I like reading, but I tend to be very personal about my reading, in the sense that I only like to read things that I like to read.
Mhm.
So if you tell me, have you read like this famous book, or have you read, I don't know, the Iliad or stuff like that, I'm like, no, because I'm not really interested in reading that. And I think that that's one of the key points to learning a language. Like, you need to be passionate about what you're assimilating, the content that you're assimilating for that language, right?
Right.
um, and reading specifically is probably one of the key parts of this development. But the problem in Mexico is that reading is not something that is incentivized a lot in schools. It's not something that is promoted a lot. And if it's promoted in a very formal way. The key would be to promote reading not as a requirement, but reading as a hobby, reading as a
Right.
passion. That would really help learners, like, to get in the mindset that if I have to learn a language, I should like immerse myself in the language, not just in like audiovisual materials such as movies or music, but also reading, because it's going to help them out a lot in terms of like understanding vocabulary, understanding like grammar and structures, and also understanding how they can develop their own voice when writing. So it's something of a problem, nationwide problem, really, to consider, at least in the professional sense of teaching English. Yeah.
Right, right. And so, like, you're the second person that I talked to, and the second person that mentions that about how and it's something that I've noticed that it's a common feedback. Like in the U.S., businesses like well, it used to be businesses like Barnes and Nobles and Borders and whatever, right? Um, Now it's mostly Amazon, but like yeah, reading and buying books, even if it's just you know thrillers like I don't know Michael Crichton or John Grisham or anything like that is a big deal, and here not so much, right? I noticed that we don't have that tier of author. We either have Condorito or Carlos Fuentes. You know, there's no middle ground for like your Stephen Kings and your Dean Koontz and your Robin Cooks and things like that, right? So it's really weird also where like there's no real like fun literature where like it can become a hobby, right?
Mm.
So like, we talked about you know a little bit about like the culture shock and the differences and whatever, and you mentioned things that you didn't like about Mexico City, which is the same reason I have vowed never to move back to Mexico City, which is the people, you know, like it's too crowded, the traffic, the distances, all that jazz, right? The weather, I was not a fan of it raining all the time, all day sometimes, but to leave it on a positive note, kind of like with your evaluations, right? It's like you end up with you start with something good, you tell them what they can improve on, and we want to end on something good. What is one thing that you've come to appreciate maybe from Mexico City in your year that you've been
Ironically enough, the people.
there? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, crowds of people, not my thing. I mean, even when I was younger, I'm not a people person, and it's actually, I think we already discussed this in person, that it's ironic that you, at least I tend to be a very like introverted person
Mhm.
outside of my job, but within my job, I have to be extroverted. Like I have to motivate, I have to engage, and I'm aware of that, and I enjoy doing that. But I think that probably takes all of my social energy, so that when I get back home, I'm just like regular old me that I don't want to interact with a lot of people. But the thing is that like throughout my stay in the foundation, I've met a lot of interesting people. Like I met a lot of interesting like friends at work, and that has like enriched my professional development and my personal development, right? So I've learned a lot in this year. I think I've learned a lot in this year, more than I've learned in the previous 7 years of my profession. uh,
Wow.
yeah, so
Nice.
it really like hypercharged my professional development in that regard, and I feel a lot more comfortable um, in how I teach and what I can do with teaching. That's not to say that I think that I now think that I'm a good teacher. I feel that I need to improve more. Um, but but yeah, like this has been probably the most positive thing. Like the people that I've met, like personally met, not like met met in the station or something.
Right.
Like yeah, like the people that I've met and that I've interacted with have all been like uh, great to work with, great to hang out with, and great to learn from. That's been pretty much the highlight of my experience here in Mexico City.
Nice. Yeah. I am shocked you did not befriend the guy on the subway that was smashing his head against the glass. Like, what?
Oh,
Oh, okay. That seems like a really interesting individual right there. No,
oh
no,
no.
that's good. That's good. You're right that it's a lot of times it's our coworkers and everything. So that's really good, Jose. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Hopefully, it's not the last time that we get to talk to you. But you have a good day. I will let you get back to your family. And you guys down in the comments, let us know if you want to know more about Jose, his job, any details, anything like that, or about Ciudad Victoria. and we'll get back to you guys as well. But yeah, have a good afternoon. I'll see you later, man.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem.